When you look back at the history of new games and their sequels, you'll notice that it's not until the second effort at a daring new idea that things really start to gain their stride. This is especially true for new game franchises. Remnant 2 iterates on the first game to create a fantastic effect, following in the footsteps of other groundbreaking sequels such as Borderlands 2 and Assassin's Creed 2, which came before it. Combat is even more fluid, satisfying, loot and build crafting have been vastly improved to allow for an infinite numbers of possibilities and reasons to grind. Boss fights have been completely reworked to get rid of spongy bosses that are assisted by an endless wave of minions, and each of the realms feels distinct and is brimming with things to do and secrets to uncover. But the game's randomly generated and incredibly replayable levels are still its defining characteristics. And in those iterations, those levels have been improved in so many different ways that it's frighteningly simple to waste half a day by returning to the same location merely to check out the various options. When it comes to games, we don't have to wait for the next one because the experience is always better the second time around. In 2019, many of us, including myself, affectionately referred to the first Remnant from the Ashes as a Dark Souls with guns, and the sequel appears to nod in violent agreement with that definition of the game. You and up to other 2 companions will travel wonderfully perilous zones that are teeming with diabolical adversaries who make short work of anyone who has the talent or patience to accomplish its purposely hard stages. Just like its predecessor, Remnant 2 does not content itself with only slapping a science fiction veneer on top of a tried and true gameplay mechanic by including all of the classic Soul-like ideas and incorporating them into the game. These ideas range from limited use self-healing items to opponents that return anytime you stop at a checkpoint. Instead, it does a masterful job of combining the best aspects of other co-op looter shooters like Borderlands and Outriders, such as an extraordinarily deep loot grind and build crafting, and it adds plenty of interesting twists that are all its own, such as procedurally generated levels and a strong set of diverse worlds for you and your teammates to jump between. The end product is one-of-a-kind mismatch of excellent ideas that complement one another in the same way that peanut butter and chocolate do, but with a significantly increased emphasis on shooting monsters in the face and being slaughtered by chunks of sentient meat. So what is not to adore about it? The strange plot begins with you playing as a nameless survivor on a post-apocalyptic Earth where a race of evil trees known as the Root are striving to seize control of the multiverse. This is similar to the story that was included in the game's predecessor. That's quite strange, isn't it? The structure is largely used to excuse you teleporting to multiple worlds in order to do incredibly fantastic looter shooter stuff and rescue the day, but it only ever becomes marginally and more intriguing than the one-sentence notion it's based on. You get the opportunity to converse with new and returning characters at your base, Ward 13, the majority of whom have a lot to say while providing you with as little actual information as is humanly possible. You find out more about the Root and what is going on with the Multiversal war, and you eventually come to a dramatic conclusion that is then immediately reversed so that you can continue playing without having to deal with the consequences of the finale. It's not that the writing is bad, in fact some of it's quite good, and there are definitely some interesting concepts at play here that the community will doubtless be crafting theories about in weeks and months ahead. It's just that very little of that has any impact on your character, who is essentially a blank slate, and it's also high concept that it often doesn't gel with any adventure that is so squarely focused on shooting alien lobsters in the thorax. The good news is that each of these numerous worlds you visit on your adventure has its own mini-story that has been skillfully handled and is much more engaging than the main mission you are on. You could find yourself in a high fancy realm of elves trying to solve a murder case, or you could be aboard a starship assisting a massive robot that looks like a Gundam wing to recover its missing cargo. Both of these scenarios are possible. Not only are these storylines better, but you also spend the great majority of your time in these worlds resolving them rather than worrying about the main story. This allows you to focus more on the planets themselves. It's a shame that whenever I was back on Earth or dealing with the core of my conflict, my eyes began to glaze over while I listened to rambling from characters I felt I barely knew at all. This happened whenever I was back on Earth or when I was dealing with the fundamental conflict. However, each and every second of the adventure's difficult gunplay is an absolute fun, and this holds true regardless of which section of the story you are currently working your way through. Every new location presents a choreographed ballet of shooting, dodging, making astute use of skills, while all attempting not to become surrounded by whichever merciless foe is doing their best to maim and dismember you. What begins as a relatively simple toolbox that includes a primary and secondary weapon, something to swing in melee combat, and a single archetype skill quickly spirals into a treasure trove of weapons, armor, highly customizable character classes, and mods that hasn't even come close to feeling repetitive after my first few dozen hours of playtime. The fact that you are constantly switching between different worlds in the multiverse, each of which has its own distinctive atmosphere and new foes to fight, is a significant contributor to the fact that combat always seems to be so novel. Loathsome is a fancy realm filled with elves who wear bowler hats and try to cut your throat in between what I can only suppose are their busy schedules as chimney sweeps, while Erud is a science fiction reality packed with murderous robots, electrical gizmos and laser guns. One of them is reality based on science fiction and the other one is based on science fiction. The worlds are so drastically different from one another that there were times where I had a hard time believing that I was still in the same game that I'd been playing just a few minutes earlier. It is rather disorienting, in a positive way, that makes such easy transition between them unique. To go from battling stone golems in a multiversal maze to hunting beasties in a lush primordial forest, and the novelty of that has not worn off in the slightest. It is really helpful that every location is crammed with optional tasks to do, secret regions to investigate, and an absolute surprising number of puzzles that are legitimately difficult to work on. When it comes down to it, the one and only thing that irritates me about the fights is that, despite there being a number of quite varied worlds to discover, the majority of them only have a small number of distinct enemy kinds to face, which means that you end up facing a large number of the same kind of foes one after the other. It's not that the enemy variety is lacking in general, in fact there are probably more different types of enemies in Remnant 2 than in the majority of other games. However, because the enemies are spread out across so many different worlds and you typically spend about 5 or 6 hours at a stretch going through each world, I did get a little bit bored of seeing the same group of flying gargoyles with armored knights in the world of Loathsome for so long. However, moving on to the following locations so rapidly wipes away any potential boredom that it may have been developing. It should come as no surprise that each planet also features a number of boss fights, and here is one of those areas in which you can tell that the devs listened to the community complaints regarding the fact that the boss fights in first Remnant lacked any sort of genuine personality. Quite frequently, they would set you up against an unforgettable foe and then hurl large amounts of henchmen at you to make the combat seem much more tough than it actually was. It gives me great pleasure to inform you that this flaw has been addressed, but Remnant 2 now considers his boss battles to be one of its primary points of differentiation. Even though there are some fights that aren't very creative, such as a random lady who throws Molotov cocktails at you and a blob monster that's just a beefier version of an existing enemy you've seen a lot already, the vast majority of the battles are not only delightfully difficult tests of your skill and your character's build, but they also have plenty of interesting mechanics. For example, a random lady throws Molotov cocktails at you. There's a battle in which simply gazing at the boss for a few seconds causes your character to go insane and die, forcing you to immediately turn your back to the monster as if you try to compose yourself. There's also a battle in which a ghost imprisons you in a haunted home and attempts to scratch your face off by emerging from the walls. My particular favorite is an experience that leaves you with unforgettable memories. It involves becoming lost in a labyrinth and having to physically battle the labyrinth itself, while navigating it and avoiding being crushed by enormous cubes. Because of how excellent it is, I think that particular encounter has the potential to become my new favorite boss battle in any game, period. In order to stay one step ahead of the ever-increasingly powerful foes and boss fights that Remnant 2 has in store for you, you will need to invest a significant amount of time refining your build in a way that brings you joy. Your archetype, also known as your class, will be the subject of most important and thrilling decision you will have to make, which you will then continue to refine. You'll have the opportunity to select one of 4 primary archetypes when the game first begins. These include the medic, who focuses on providing support, the challenger, who is a badass close-quarter tank, the hunter, who is a long-range sniper and a scout, and the handler, who provides you with a very helpful dog companion. The hunter, for example, has an ability that highlights all enemies on the battlefield and a passive perk that makes critical hits extend the duration of any skill they have equipped, whereas the challenger has the ability to do an area of effect war stomp at enemies in front of them and automatically gets back up after taking fatal damage. Both of these abilities are passive. When you level up your archetype, you open up new options, including perks that have an effect on you and any teammate in your group, as well as bonuses that activate for a limited period after you use your relic, which is a consumable healing item that is analogous to Elden Ring's Flask of Crimson Tears. These additional possibilities range from perks that influence you and any teammate in your group to bonuses that activate for a brief time after you use your relic. Because you are able to freely switch archetypes in Remnant 2, you are free to explore and level up every role on a single character, rather than having to start over again. This eliminates the need to restart the game. When you earn the ability to simultaneously equip a second archetype in the midst of a campaign, a whole new world of possibilities will become available to you. And this is when the real fun will begin. You can lead your furry buddy to distract and obstruct the enemy while you pick them off with a sniper from a distance if, for example, you equip the handler and the hunter at the same time. This creates some fantastic synergy between the two pieces of equipment. Better yet, there is a not yet disclosed number of more archetypes that may be unlocked by completing certain tasks that are dispersed among the broken worlds that you will travel through. After making a purchase from a hidden seller in one region, I was able to acquire the amazing Summoner archetype, which transformed me into a witch who would call forth monsters. In another, I was able to track down a fugitive foe who bestowed upon me the consumable focused alchemist archetype. This provided me the ability to control the battlefield with potent concoctions that could be tossed. It took me a dozen hours of searching just to find the handful of archetypes I discovered, and I'm sure there's still more that I haven't found. The hunt for these fantastic game changers has me so excited that I'm almost frothing at the mouth to find them. In addition to the archetypes, there is a vast selection of weapons, rings, amulets and armor to choose from in order to round out your build, as well as half a dozen other in which you can further customize and improve your equipment to exact specifications. It is a real Shangri-La for build crafters, and with the majority of the equipment being scattered all over the world, including many that are sealed behind obscure secret riddles and missions, there is always an incentive to come back out there and investigate. All of this comes together to create some of the most mesmerizing fighting I've experienced in a looter shooter in a very long time, and I wasted way too many hours just tinkering with different configurations of my loadout and looking for new items to add to my collection of weapons and armor. In point of fact, I've managed to accumulate more than 80 rings so far, and I have the distinct impression that I'm not even close to finding them all. However, there is one significant letdown in Remnant 2's build crafting, and that is in the fairly lackluster armor. This is the game's worst problem. It is not possible to improve or customize armor in the same manner that you can do so with weapons, mods, and virtually every other aspect of the game, despite the fact that there are plenty of sets that can be unearthed or bought from various vendors. It is a particularly unexpected omission, taking into consideration that Remnant from the Ashes features an armor upgrading system that enables you to invest in the sets that you like the most, and enhance both your resistances and your armor. I do kinda long for that. Although it only took me 20 hours to, quote, finish Remnant 2, that is just the beginning of the amount of time I will spend really playing the game. One of the aspects of this series, which is nearly unique to its genre, is that the levels, plots and side quests are all randomly generated, so each playthrough will seem very different from the last. You could play through the entirety of Remnant 2 without realizing that anything wasn't hand-built, right up until you talk to your friend about your various playthroughs and almost immediately discover that you aren't playing the same campaign. It is both impressively random and so well planned that you could play through the entirety of Remnant 2 without realizing that anything wasn't hand-built. You will surely end up in different worlds, in a different order, face different bosses, and discover totally unique tasks depending on how you play the game. This is feasible due to the fact that each planet compromises two distinct narrative paths, in addition to a wide variety of other variations along the route. It's not just a matter of rooms being slapdash-sewn together to give a smidgen of variety in place of original content. The variations between runs can be so significant that it's hard to see them as being in the same universe at all. In one playthrough of a realm called Yesha, I spent almost the entire time indoors navigating through dark corridors full of crazed cultists. In another playthrough, I found myself in dense woods with a blood-red moon looming overhead. In yet another playthrough, I was lost within a maze of hovering platforms, surrounded by floating aliens who bombarded me with plasma projectiles. In one playthrough of the fantasy world Lazome, I spent most of my time in the glittering palaces of the noble elites, battling winged angels and armored paladins. In another playthrough, I spent my entire run amongst the slums and sewers of that world's lower class, fighting off vandals and ne'er-do-wells. They are practically unrecognizable from one another. However, you do not need to begin a fresh campaign in order to take advantage of them. You are able to immediately and infinitely reroll that area anytime you wish after you have defeated the final boss of your initial playthrough of any given globe. This will generate new possibilities and a fresh set of missions for you to accomplish along with it. To see the most important content in each globe, you will need to visit each one a total of 2 times at the very least. And even if you manage to obtain some of the same side quests numerous times, like I sometimes did, you may make a different decision at the end to see what would have occurred, and which awards you would have gained, had you let things go the other way to find out what the consequences would have been. I don't know if I've ever seen a more effective and innovative use of procedural generation before, and the near perfect execution in that regard makes Remnant 2 extremely replayable. Because this is a cooperative multiplayer game, you will be able to visit the worlds of your friends in order to assist them, acquire experience, and partake in the benefits that they earn. Additionally, you will be able to observe how different the world from your friends are from your own. When playing in co-op, you can expect to have a nice time, although the performance is lower than when playing solo. When I was playing on PC, I had more frequent frame rate hitches and occasional disconnects, when the scaling of the enemies is questionable, which can make fighting less inviting to groups of players. It's a shame, for instance, that when I was playing by myself in one region, I was able to breeze through it, but when I asked 2 of my friends who were playing at a lower level to join me, we got absolutely destroyed. The adjustment of levels that take place behind the scenes may ensure that lower level players won't be instantly destroyed when joining a higher level player, but it most certainly makes it more difficult for the entire group to be successful by significantly increasing the health and damage output of the enemies. You think that a game with drop in and drop out co-op would want to encourage new players to join their existing group of friends, but the way damage is scaled now makes it more likely that new players would become frustrated and quit the game. Also, it is important to point out that the present version of Remnant 2 does not support crossplay between PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PC. So, what is the final verdict? It's incredible to think that if I were to make a list of my favorite Souls-likes, my favorite looter shooters, and my favorite games that are produced procedurally, Remnant 2 would be on all of those lists. It's a game that combines elements that I enjoy playing in other games. This is a victorious sequel that not only reimagines the Souls-like genre as a cooperative looter shooter, but also fully nails that notion in nearly every way, even many that the first did not. This is a game that is a true improvement over its predecessor. It has a clever multiversal concept that allows for a ton of different adventures to be contained within one package. Completely engrossed in combat, challenging and memorable boss fights, extremely dense options for build crafting, incredibly cool procedurally generated levels, and an incredibly cool build crafting system. It is very likely going to become one of the games that I play the most this year. If you find yourself in any corner of the multiverse, you owe it to yourself to make the most of the situation by playing this precious one. And that was my review of Remnant 2. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.